Hi, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of That Catholic Saints Guide. And I want you to join me on this, what I hope is going to be a weekly journey through the lives of some of the most incredible men, women, and children who have ever lived. Yes, even children have been saints. And whether you're a Catholic, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a non-believer or a believer in anything, you're going to want to watch this program. Why? Because it's going to benefit you. You're going to learn about some of the most fantastic people, amazing people who have ever lived. And in hearing the details of their lives and how they went through this pilgrimage we call life, you're going to learn how to better your own life. Now, the way it's going to work is hopefully on a weekly basis, I will be interviewing the people whose job it is, literal job it is, to know these folks whose process for beatification or canonization, and we'll explain all that in just a bit here, whose job it is to know these folks' lives inside out. So they know better than anyone what makes these incredible folks just so amazing. Should probably back up though. Let's begin with some of the terms that we're going to use. And this is going to be very helpful for you as you go along and journey with me on this process. The folks with whom I will typically discuss the lives of these saints or potential saints, saints in the making, are what we call postulators and vice postulators. Postulators are people who are at Rome, at the Holy See, the Vatican, and their job is to kind of help promote the cause for beatification or canonization once it has gone through all of the processes that it needs to go through, and then hopefully it will culminate in the beatification or the canonization of the individual in question. A vice postulator, their daily job is to gather all of the information necessary for the process in Rome to continue going forward. That means that they talk with people whose lives have been impacted. They interview all the people that these people knew. They help get all of their papers together, all of the books that they've written, all of the things that they said that are on record, and go through them, picking through them for a fine-tooth comb for anything that would, tend to indicate that they are not worthy of beatification or canonization. Anything that would disqualify them for this, and that sort of thing. They are also, if someone has prayed for the intercession of that blessed or that saint or the servant of God or venerable, and we'll get into all those terms here in a second, then and that person has had a favor granted as a result of that intercession, then what they're going to do, I should say, is take that information and determine, okay, was that just nice? So for instance, please help me pass my test. Or dear God, through the prayers of so-and-so, please help me pass my test. Or, was it something kind of pedestrian like that? Or was it really truly phenomenal in the greatest sense of the word? Was it, in other words, a miracle? So for instance, babies who are healed in the womb of life-threatening illnesses or some sort of disorder that would have kept them as an invalid for their entire life. And there's no medical explanation for this. People who are about to go in for cancer surgery, and the next morning they wake up and the doctor examines them and they can't find a sign of cancer in their entire body. There's not a single cell, and to this day these people are cancer free and all that sort of good thing. People who were not supposed to live, doctors said pull the life support system, and the next thing, something, in other words, that can be verified through science. Typically is through science, through medicine, and being raised from the dead, this sort of deal. Although that typically happens when someone is a saint is living. It very rarely, I don't know that I've ever heard of it happening if someone has prayed for the intercession of a saint. But the intercession of saints do incredible things. The miracle that qualified John Paul II for beatification was the healing of a French woman religious, a sister, a nun, although nun's more of a technical term, um, a more technical term, of Parkinson's disease, which was the disease that he had. There are saints whose prayers have helped cure people from tuberculosis. These sorts of things without benefit of medicine, which isn't to say that people weren't searching out medicine. It just happened to be that, please, Lord, through the intercession of so and so, can I be cured from, or can my relative, my friend, whoever, be cured from tuberculosis, and thereby that person is healed. And the doctor says, "Wow, this is amazing. Can't be verified, can't be explained by medical science." And they do the investigation, and if indeed there is no possible way of explaining this in natural terms, it can be, not always is, but can be qualified as a bona fide miracle. And if that's attributed to that particular saint, blessed, venerable, whatever's intercession, then it's going to be something that we can something that we can then use for their being furthered along the beatification canonization road. We should also talk a little bit about what is the difference between a servant of God, a venerable, a blessed, sorry, and a canonized saint. And we'll also talk about the process of how that happens. So, a servant of God is someone whose beatification cause, not sainthood cause, because it's very distinct, or at least right now it is, whose beatification cause has been formally introduced. So let's say, for instance, a priest who I had the blessing of knowing. Not very well. I only met him once, but it was a very memorable. I could tell you practically every moment of my experience with him. And his name is Father John Hardin. He was an old school Jesuit, one of the really good ones, and quite known for his holiness and his faithfulness to the magisterium, and his being very, very just holy. He was just a holy man who was concerned with souls and the salvation of souls in Jesus Christ. So, when he died, he was just the late Father John Hardin. But then the Archbishop of the diocese in which he died, which is the Archdiocese of Detroit, agreed to open his cause for beatification. And so with the formal opening of his cause, he was allowed to be titled the Servant of God, Father John Hardin, or the Servant of God, John Hardin. Now that starts the investigation process, and that's a very, very lengthy thing, because they have to find, if he wrote something on a scrap of paper that had any theological import to it whatsoever, they have to collect that. They have to interview witnesses. They have to interview people who knew him. They have to collect any books that he may have written, any interviews he may have given. And as you can imagine, this is a very painstaking and sometimes expensive process. It's not cheap because you have to pay people for their time. And you have to pay to collect information. Copying takes money. Electricity to make the copies takes money. Internet bills take money. All these different things, the costs add up. And so, but that's why we have a vice postulator. That's their job. And sometimes they're just volunteers doing it on a catch-as-catch-can basis, which I think is really beautiful. It's really wonderful that they're doing this sort of thing. So in any event, so they're able to be titled Servant of God. Once all that information is collected and it is forwarded to Rome, that is to say to the Holy See, the Vatican, there is an office there, a bureaucracy. It's called a dicastery, Dicastry. T-E-R-Y, dicastery, and it is an office within the Vatican, and its job is to investigate saints' causes. That's all they do, is investigate saints' causes. Now, there are already 10,000 beatified or canonized saints in the Catholic Church, not to mention all the many thousands and hundreds and such of servants of God and venerables and people whose causes are waiting to get going and all this sort of thing. They don't concern themselves with that, though. They're more concerned simply with the causes that have been forwarded to Rome, and yeah, they'll help out with causes that are in the process that are still in the domestic side, if you will, that are still at home based in a diocese or within a religious order, and they'll help them with that. But basically, their job is to take all this information that's ultimately forwarded them on some beatification cause and start working through it. And if they think that at the end of their investigation, there is enough to warrant going forward, that yes, it's good to investigate the cause and see whether this person could qualify as a blessed, for instance, then what they do is they forward that to their congregation's prefect, its minister, its secretary in U.S. nomenclature. We have the Secretary of State, we have the Secretary of the Interior, we have the Secretary of this, that, and the other thing. And so it is that prefect then takes that information and goes through it. He approves it, puts his stamp of approval on it, and then he takes it to a meeting with the Holy Father and says, here's a list of people this month that we would encourage that they be recognized with the decree of holy virtue, or of heroic virtue, pardon me, decree of heroic virtue. And if the Pope were to issue a decree of heroic virtue for, say, Father John Hardon, the servant of God, John Hardon, then what that would then mean, John Hardon would go from being the servant of God, John Hardon, to being called the Venerable John Hardon. And typically at that point, we wouldn't use their clerical title or anything like that. Then what would happen is, and this is happening along the way anyway, but what they're doing at this point is looking for miracles. And so they're really trying to get people to pray for this person's intercession, which is why you might find a servant of God's prayer card in the back of a church, or in the back of a cathedral, or at a religious retreat house, or wherever, in a Catholic bookstore or something like this. Wherever you might find such items, you'll find these things helping to promote a particular saint's cause, or you can at least. Once it used to be that you had to have 2 miracles for every level of the next 2 levels of beatification or canonization. 2 for beatification, 2 for canonization. Because, when the church says that someone is beatified, when the church says that someone is canonized, that is a declaration by the church, an infallible declaration by the church. You can put your stamp of approval on it, you can take it to the bank, however you want to put it. That says that that person is in heaven. So to say that someone, so to have that kind of infallible declaration, one that cannot be questioned in any way. I mean, you can take this to the bank, in other words, then it's got to be spot on. You can't have any room for error. And so you can see why it was 2 and 2. You want to really make sure that this is good to go. The problem with that, as in the eyes of Pope St. John Paul II early on during his pontificate, is he saw that this was slowing down the sainthood process. And while there were a lot of great oldie but goodie saints, St. Francis, St. Clare, St. Barbara, St. Catherine of Siena, St. Anthony of Padua, the people whose names grace hundreds, tediously in my opinion, hundreds of churches throughout the world. Everyone knew them, but the Pope wanted some newer saints. He wanted some new, fresh examples from our own times, not some plaster statue that you could look up at, but pictures, videos, even camera footage, whatever, of people who lived within our own memory, who were holy examples for us to follow, whose lives were better because they followed the ways of the Lord, and who then were, and who are now in heaven as a result of that, sort of, hey, if they can do it, then we can do it too. That's the wonderful thing that I love about saints, is because they show schmucks like me that if they can do it, I can do it too. Because, saints weren't perfect. If you've ever read the life of a saint, and I hope that we get into some really good examples here, you know that they were not, it's not like they were Minerva, who was born full formed from the forehead of Zeus. They were not born perfect. They were not born saints. St. Francis de Sales, for instance, had a terrible temper, was very gruff with people, had a short fuse, would get easily irritated and irked by folks. And what he did in realizing that that was not a Christian way to act, he overcame that. He worked really, really hard, bit by bit. It was like chipping away a stone with a dull butter knife. You can imagine how chipping away at a block of granite with a dull butter knife, how easily that is done, how quickly it will happen. Not very. And so, he knew he had to do work, but he did the work. And by the end of his life, people said, oh, what a meek, mild, humble person, never gets mad, never loses his temper, never raises his voice, never yells. As a young man, none of that was true. So, do you see how I'm saying these people can help make our lives better, our walk, our pilgrimage in this life so much easier? And yes, ultimately, it's going to lead us to Christ. But that's just going to happen. It's not going to be like something or someone is going to force that on us. It's just what we're going to want, because we're going to realize it's true and it's beautiful and it's good. So, in any event, continuing forward. So we want to have, Pope John Paul II really wanted to have people who were examples in our own time. So, for instance, there was a woman doctor in Italy who died 2 weeks after giving birth to her child, whom she was encouraged to abort because she had cancer. And they wanted to treat the cancer, and they were afraid that the treatment of the cancer would lead to a deformed or would otherwise kill the baby. And she said, no, don't kill the baby. Save the baby first. Put the baby's needs ahead of my own. And then, once I get done with the treatment, or once I get done with the pregnancy, we'll worry about the rest after that. As it turned out, natural means cured her of that, and I'm just, that's an amazing story in and of itself. But what happened is that she gives this birth, and this is back in the time before antibiotics were readily available, and she goes home, and she's already contracted sepsis from having been in the hospital. It's the easiest place where you can contract sepsis. So you can see where, why that's an heroic example for us. She died basically to give her life for her daughter. Is how a lot of people, even if she hadn't, a lot of people say she would have been beatified and canonized just because she was such a holy woman, and she was. But, she died in 1963. That's a relatively recent example for her. We have colored pictures of her. She's not some plaster statue. We know what she looks like. We know how she talked. We know um, what her features were like and maybe how she moved because her children are still with us. She had 3 children who survived. So, a really, really amazing story. Her name's Saint Gianna Molla. Um, a beautiful, beautiful woman in every way, shape, and form, and someone whose life is worthy of our not only study but emulation. That's the sort of thing he wanted to do, and so he took the requirement down from 2 and 2 for beatification and canonization, instead made it 1 and 1. So someone who's up for beatification, they have to have a verifiable, bona fide miracle to their name, something that cannot be uh, attributed to natural means, medical intervention, anything like that. It has to be completely inexplicable for modern science. And then it also can't be that, so let's say that, just to use Father Hardin's example, I am going to, pray for him. I have, it's not that I've lost my job. I've lost my job, and I, and I need work, but gosh, at the same time, one of the reasons I can't find a job is because I've developed a chronic cough, chronic bronchitis that keeps me from being able to work on a steady basis, or some other medical condition that isn't just going to be taken care of with an antibiotic or something like that. And the doctors don't know what to do, or they do know what to do, but it's very serious, and there's, natural methods of intervention aren't working. And so I pray for his intercession. But at the same time, I pray for the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, of Saint Joseph, Saint Anthony of Padua. I'm praying to more than just one person. And I get healed. I get miraculously healed. That is not going to count toward the beatification or canonization later on of Father John Hardin. Instead, it's a wash. It doesn't count for anybody, really. It's a nice thing. I got cured, I got healed, but it's not going to count. It has to be prayers only to that potential saint. Then, if a miracle is verified, what you get is that person, the Pope, then, again, through a meeting with the prefect of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, say that 10 times fast, is going to issue a decree of beatification, saying, yes, this person can be beatified. And then what happens is that the prefect goes to where the home of that person is, the cathedral, typically in the home where that person lived. And that person is then, there's a formula that's pronounced, a certain kind of oath of office, if you will, but it's not an oath, it's just a proclamation. A proclamation is read, and that person is then considered blessed. We call that person, say, there's Blessed Pina Suriano, is one of my favorite saints, or Blessed Pope Pius IX, or who's another one, Blessed Titus Brandsma, all these different great people. And, church can be named after them then. We can pray in public. We can, you can pray directly to anyone who's passed on or is now before the beatific vision that you want. We see evidence of this in Scripture and throughout the history of Christianity, that people have asked for the intercession of those who have walked the walk of faith and who are now in faith as a result of their faith, and they're accepting Christ and being saved by him and by his blood, and are before the beatific vision in heaven, etc. I'm explaining this for the benefit of some of my separated brethren in the Protestant confessions. We can pray directly to them, as opposed to, say, if there's a prayer card. If you look at a prayer card for a servant of God versus one for a blessed, it'll say, "Dear Lord, through the intercession of the servant of God, fill in the blank, please grant me the graces I now request." Whereas with a blessed or a saint, it'll say, Saint so and so, blessed so and so, please intercede with God for my intentions, for the graces that I need, etc. So it's you can now pray directly to that person because we know that that person is before the beatific vision, and then we know that they can see God face to face. That they can we know through the book of Revelation, chapters 5 and 6, that saints know exactly what's going on earth. We know that also from history. We know that from the testimony of the church fathers. We know that from all these different things that this is true. And so we can pray directly to them, and they can intercede for us, for us, and for our needs. It's not just medical stuff. Hey, my son's really having a tough time in school. Hey, my wife has been really sad lately. Hey, the people next door are struggling because the father's out of work, the mother's job doesn't make enough to pay the bills, and we're helping them out to the best degree we can. But dad needs to get back to work, please. Whatever you would pray for someone in heaven can pray for the same thing. So in any event, getting back to the subject of beatification, that person is in heaven. Now, the only difference between someone who's blessed and someone who is a saint is this: the veneration, that is for lack of a better way of putting it, the attention given to a particular saint. If they're a blessed, they're still a saint. They're still in heaven. It's a signed, sealed, and delivered verification that they are in heaven before the beatific vision of God, the blessed vision of God, the happy vision of God, if you will. However, their veneration, the attention that they're given, their being venerated as a saint, historically has been limited to the diocese, the area in which they live, because the world in the Catholic Church is divided up into dioceses. So that's limited to the diocese in which they lived, where they ministered, even if that wasn't from which, where they were born or were raised, the country in which they're from. So, for instance, the Blessed John Paul II, now everyone knew about him. His veneration was proper to the entire world in a certain sense, but thus to the entire church. But it was technically limited to Poland, the Archdiocese of Krakow, the Diocese of Rome, because he was the Bishop of Rome after all, and oddly enough, the United States, and maybe a couple of other places, but that was where his veneration was officially limited to. Whereas with canonization, being enrolled in the canon, the list of saints, that's what a canon is. So, there's the canon of Scripture, the list of books that are in Scripture. There's the canon of the Mass, the list of prayers that are in the Mass, and such. And then there's the canon of saints, the list of saints. And so, canonization means that the veneration is universal. It's throughout the entire church. There are some blesseds whose names are on the official calendar of saints for that day. For instance, Blessed Miguel Pro, a priest who was martyred by the Mexican government during the Cristero War back in the early 20s. I believe it was 1923. Amazing story. Hopefully we can get to him at some point. The guy's really funny and a lot of fun. But his feast is November 23rd. John Paul II wanted him to be an example to all of us. And so he didn't short circuit the canonization process, but he did put Blessed Miguel Pro on the calendar of saints for that day. There's 3, which is a lot in the current calendar of the saints. So it's very, it's a beautiful thing, but it's very, very rare that this sort of thing happens in any event. So we have, that's the difference between canonizations and beatifications, being venerable, decree of heroic virtue, and a servant of God. How does it all get started, though? Well, it's very simple. It gets started because someone, a group, a parish, a diocese, says, a religious order says, here is someone we want to put forward for beatification, for veneration. And those people then petitioned the Holy See for the local bishops' conference for express authority to be able to do that. So, for instance, G.K. Chesterton, if you are not familiar with his writings, his novels, his poems, his essays, these sorts of things, he's got a wonderful book that Protestants and Catholics alike love. Even I've heard some Muslims reading it and really love it. One of the 20th century's most amazing writers. And he was a very holy man by all accounts. He started off life as a Unitarian Universalist, or is it Universalist Unitarian? I always get the two confused. And then he became an Anglican, which was the Church of England, so the church for his country. And then after that, entered the Catholic Church. And he is, again, just so funny, but very, very holy, and wrote some great, great things that have brought a lot of people to Christ. So, for instance, C.S. Lewis. Many of you are familiar with C.S. Lewis. Chronicles of Narnia, these sorts of things. C.S. Lewis was a soldier during World War II, and at that time he was an atheist. Had been raised with some sort of faith, but was basically an atheist by the time he entered battle during World War I, and was wounded in that war and was convalescing for weeks. Had nothing else to read. Someone gave him a copy of G.K. Chesterton's Everlasting Man. And as a result of that, he converted from being an atheist to being a Christian. And his book, Mere Christianity, has in turn led millions of people, maybe tens and hundreds of millions even, because it's been out for so long, but has moved millions of people at least to being Christian, whether from atheism or from just agnostic or non-practicing of any sort, spiritual but not religious. In any event, did that. So went from being an atheist because of G.K. Chesterton, and then had this incredible impact on the rest of the world as a result of it. Father G.K. Chesterton also is the author of the Father Brown mystery novels. If you remember the TV show with Tom Bosley back in the 80s, and also a movie with Alex Guinness based on the books. BBC, Netflix was playing BBC's series, The Father Brown Mysteries. So, and if you've never heard Lady Felicia's scream, you have to go watch it right now. Her screams upon finding a dead body are the best in the world. In fact, there's one scene where someone does a better scream than her, and she's about to scream, and she looks over at the person in surprise, kind of as if to say, "That's my job." It's kind of an inside joke, I'm guessing. But in any event, G.K. Chesterton, a group in Argentina of all places, where his works have been translated into Spanish, they petitioned the bishop of the diocese in which Gilbert Keith Chesterton lived and died, and they asked for that cause to go forward. Didn't happen, at least it hasn't happened yet. A layman here is trying to get Queen Catherine of Aragon. Catherine, you will remember, was the much abused, much forgotten, much maligned wife of King Henry VIII, who wanted to have the church recognize his divorce of her to annul that marriage so that he can marry his lover, Anne Boleyn, or the woman he wanted to be his lover, Anne Boleyn, who eventually became Queen Anne Boleyn, who then lost her head, but not before giving birth to the woman who would become Queen Elizabeth I. So a layman in the United States petitioned the diocese in which Catherine died, the bishop there, to open her cause for beatification. Didn't happen. But that's the way it kind of works out, is that a diocese or a religious group or a religious order or a group of laymen or even a layman will petition a diocese to do to open that cause up. And then it goes through the process that we've already described. So, been a bit lengthy of an explanation, but it's not something that's just explained in a sentence, really. And I want you to be able to understand this so that as we go forward, you're going to understand what it is that goes into the making of a saint, so that when I'm interviewing these postulators and vice postulators and other people who knew maybe these saints, then you can understand what it is that we're talking about here. So in any event, if you'd like this, please click like, click subscribe, ring that bell so you get new notifications, and we will see you next time on That Catholic Saints Guy.